President Donald Trump issued a warning to Iran: stop killing protesters or face severe consequences. The killing continued. Demonstrators died in the streets. Others faced arrest and execution. Now, the United States is translating words into action. American warships have positioned themselves at Iran's doorstep. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei understands the gravity of the moment. On January 26th, multiple outlets confirmed a significant U.S. military deployment. The Washington Post reported that the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, along with its carrier strike group, has reached waters near Iran. The carrier continues moving deeper into the Middle East, preparing for potential operations, whether strikes or broader efforts to support the regime change that Iranian protesters have demanded for weeks. Trump's intentions will largely determine what unfolds. The USS Abraham Lincoln, escorted by 3 destroyers, recently departed the western Indian Ocean, where it lacked the range to effectively strike Iranian targets. The carrier is expected to enter either the North Arabian Sea or the Gulf of Oman in coming days. The Washington Post notes that the carrier strike group alone represents a substantial threat. The USS Abraham Lincoln carries 5,000 sailors and dozens of fighter jets ready to conduct airstrikes. The 3 accompanying destroyers, USS Frank E. Peterson Jr., USS Michael Murphy, and USS Spruance, collectively possess dozens of missiles and air defense systems potentially capable of intercepting Iranian drones and missiles. Trump has made no secret of his plans. On January 22, he told reporters about the incoming carrier group. The War Zone reports Trump stating, "We have a big flotilla going in that direction, and we'll see what happens. We have a big force going toward Iran. I'd rather not see anything happen, but we're watching them very closely." He described the deployment as an armada, and added, "We have a massive fleet heading in that direction, and maybe we won't have to use it. We'll see." Characteristically, Trump left his true objectives ambiguous. The War Zone provides additional details about the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group's capabilities. The carrier operates 8 squadrons flying various aircraft: F-35C Lightning IIs, FA-18EF Super Hornets, E-2D Hawkeyes, MH-60RS Seahawks, CMV-22B Ospreys, and EA-18G Growlers. This diverse aircraft inventory provides operational flexibility. However, the carrier group has not been reinforced by additional air power at other U.S. locations used for strikes against Iran. The U.S. base at Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean has received no bomber deployments, though C-17 Globemaster III cargo aircraft have flown to that base, suggesting gradual preparation. The United States has also dispatched Patriot and Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD, air defense systems to the Middle East, presumably to counter any Iranian retaliation. The United Kingdom appears poised to participate in potential operations. The War Zone reports that online flight trackers recorded several F-15E Strike Eagles and KC-135 Stratotanker aerial refueling aircraft departing Royal Air Force Lakenheath for the Middle East. Britain has also deployed its Typhoon Squadron, jointly operated with Qatar, to the Gulf region for what its Ministry of Defense describes as defensive purposes. The War Zone speculates this expanding force will supplement existing U.S. assets in the Middle East, including fighter jets at bases near Iran, 3 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers, and possibly a submarine operating in nearby waters. This growing military presence is advancing toward Iran. The regime's response has been predictable. The Washington Post reports that Iran placed its armed forces on high alert, according to a senior Iranian official who spoke with reporters on January 23rd after Trump's hints about the carrier group. Initially, the official expressed hope for de-escalation. "This military buildup, we hope that it is not something for real confrontation, but we are ready for a worst-case scenario." The official added that any U.S. strike would trigger a response exceeding Iran's reaction during the 12-day war with Israel, which the official claims Iran did not view as an existential threat. The official stated Iran tried to be very restrained, predictable, and measured in its responses to both Israelis and Americans. "This time, we take any attack, limited, unlimited, surgical, kinetic, whatever they call it, as an all-out war against us. and we will respond in the hardest way possible. While Iranian threats of retaliation are commonplace, this warning deserves attention. David Kozakaru of the Times of Israel argued in a January 22nd opinion piece that Iran's regime might rapidly escalate across multiple fronts if it perceives U.S. actions as an existential threat. Kozakaru theorizes such escalation could include attacks on American assets and military bases throughout the Middle East, disruption of global energy flows, and strikes against Israel. The Strait of Hormuz represents a critical pressure point. Approximately one-fifth of the world's petroleum liquids, roughly 20 million barrels daily, transit through the strait. Iran certainly possesses retaliatory options. Whether those options are realistic remains debatable. During its brief war with Israel, Iran did not conduct strikes or disrupt operations in the Strait of Hormuz. It also refrained from using the strait as leverage during Operation Midnight Hammer, when 125 U.S. military aircraft struck 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities in summer 2025. Iran's threats of counterattacks could be empty rhetoric. Not necessarily. Following Operation Midnight Hammer, Iran did attack a U.S. military base in Qatar, launching missiles that produced loud explosions over Doha. However, the response was far smaller than the preceding operation, with Trump calling the attack very weak and expected. Still, this establishes a precedent. Iran may attempt to follow through on its threats, even if the actual response falls short of its rhetoric. Iran has made clear it possesses anti-ship missiles capable of targeting the USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group. Reports suggest some missiles have a 1,200 nautical mile range, with hypersonic capabilities potentially posing the greatest threat to the USS Abraham Lincoln. Iran does possess anti-ship missiles. WIO News reported on January 24th that several systems could threaten the American carrier strike group if it enters range. The Khalij Fars ballistic missile, also known as the Persian Gulf, has a 300-kilometer or 186-mile range, carries a 650-kilogram or approximately 1,433-pound warhead, and may reach speeds up to Mach 4. Iran's Noor and Qadr systems provide coastal defense against nearby ships. The Zulfadar Basir reportedly operates from a mobile launch system with a 700-kilometer or 434-mile range. The Abu Mahdi cruise missile supposedly flies at low altitudes, uses AI to adjust its flight path, and has a range exceeding 1,000 kilometers, or about 621 miles, allegedly. Whether these specifications perform as claimed against a force as powerful as the United States is deploying remains uncertain. Iran may also activate proxy forces in other countries. European airlines are canceling or rerouting flights around Iran, Iraq, and Israel to avoid the escalating situation. Iranian proxy forces in Iraq and Yemen are signaling readiness to strike U.S. assets. The United States faces threats not only from Iran directly, but also from proxies, creating unpredictability if American actions trigger broader conflict. This could all be the Iranian regime attempting to project power it either lacks or knows the United States can overwhelm. Iran had no substantial response to Operation Midnight Hammer beyond what Trump characterized as a weak strike on a U.S. base in Qatar. The current rhetoric may indicate Iran is cornered rather than prepared for confrontation with the United States. One observer compared Iran to a cornered chihuahua threatening to bite ankles. Caution is warranted in interpreting these threats. Nevertheless, the United States has sent a carrier strike group toward Iran, and Iran's regime is threatening military response while claiming it hopes such action never becomes necessary. This raises two critical questions. Why is this happening now? And what does the United States, particularly Trump, plan to do next? The catalyst for these events lies in the protests that have flooded Iranian streets for weeks. The unrest began when shopkeepers, frustrated with Iran's economic conditions, took to the streets. Others opposed to Iran's ruling regime joined them, and a small protest rapidly escalated into a major crisis for Khamenei and his inner circle. The United States has supported Iranian protesters verbally, if not through direct action, up to this point. Trump quickly threatened to strike Iran if the regime killed protesters, and he has encouraged the demonstrations repeatedly in subsequent weeks. On January 13th, Trump posted on Truth Social, "Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions. Save the names of the killers and abusers. They will pay a big price. I have canceled all meetings with Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. Help is on its way. MEGA." The War Zone reported that one day after this post, Trump claimed his threats of U.S. retaliation had succeeded. Trump told the press, "We were told that the killing in Iran is stopping and stopped. Stopping. And there's no plan for executions or an execution or executions. So, I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it." Trump and his administration did find out. The killing continued. The death toll remains the central question. The BBC reported that Khamenei himself acknowledged thousands of deaths in the protests by January 17th. This acknowledgement followed a report by the US-based Iranian human rights activist news agency, which claimed the Iranian regime's crackdown on the revolution had killed 3,090 people at that time. The number now appears significantly higher. On January 26th, the Japan Times reported two estimates. Mai Sato, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran, estimated 5,000 deaths earlier in the week, though reports from doctors in Iran suggested the figure could reach 20,000. The same agency previously quoted by the BBC reported 5,002 verified deaths while investigating 9,787 additional potential protest-related deaths as of January 26th. Time magazine suggests the number may exceed even the highest estimates. In a January 25 report, Time stated that two senior officials in Iran's Ministry of Health told the outlet that up to 30,000 Iranians may have died between January 8 and January 9 alone. The officials claim the death toll overwhelmed Iran's health services to the point where body bag supplies were exhausted, and some deceased were transported in semi-trailers rather than ambulances. Time notes this figure has not been independently verified. Even if inaccurate, thousands have certainly died despite Trump's claims that the United States would act if Iran's regime didn't stop the killing. Beyond deaths, the regime has suppressed protests through other means. Amnesty International reports that Khamenei's regime ordered mass internet shutdowns as early as January 8th, which the organization claims was an attempt to conceal crimes being committed. Thousands of Iranians have been arrested for participating in protests, with the Washington Post claiming the number exceeds 20,000. The protests are now over, at least according to Iran. Those who survived their demonstrations against Iran's regime are unhappy about the lack of U.S. response. The Washington Post reports, those who risk their lives inside Iran to demonstrate have said they feel betrayed by the U.S. president's inaction. The USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group heading toward Iran appears to be a belated response. This returns us to the question repeatedly posed: what happens next? The answer depends heavily on what Trump hopes to achieve, following what appears to be a weakening of Iran's regime. On January 13th, the BBC reported it was decision time for Trump, and his actions in coming weeks would determine Iran's future. The BBC quoted Will Todman, a senior fellow in the Middle Eastern program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, who said, "It's hard to tell exactly what course of action Trump is likely to take, given we don't know what his full aim is here." Todman suggested Trump may be more interested in influencing Iran's regime than toppling it. "I think the risks of regime change are so great that I don't yet believe that is his primary objective here," Todman stated, adding, "It could be more concessions in the nuclear talks. It could be to stop the crackdown. It also could be to try to implement reforms that lead to some sort of sanctions relief." Perhaps Trump prefers the devil he knows to the one he doesn't. However, if Trump has decided regime change is necessary, two angles require consideration: what the United States will attack and who replaces Iran's regime. Regarding potential strikes by the USS Abraham Lincoln carrier strike group and other assembled U.S. forces, The Guardian suggests they would be unlikely to target Iran's nuclear facilities again. Operation Midnight Hammer already accomplished that, though questions remain about the operation's effectiveness, and the United States likely won't repeat previous strategies. The BBC speculated on January 13 that a limited strike targeting Iranian military infrastructure or commanders could have encouraged Iranian protesters while warning the ruling regime. However, if Iran is being truthful about suppressing the protests, the opportunity for such a strike may have passed. Perhaps the United States will target Khamenei himself. That might prove difficult. The Jerusalem Post reports that Iran's supreme leader has been moved to a fortified underground shelter containing a network of tunnels, making him hard to locate and eliminate or extract. If the United States does eliminate Khamenei, it removes the devil it knows, and someone must fill the power vacuum. One analysis suggests that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's recent visit to Iraq, where he warned against supporting Iran's regime, may represent preparation for a future where civilian leadership replaces Iran's theocratic rule. Rubio's Iraq visit is described as potentially preparing the region for an Ayatollah-less Iran that has a civilian leader, characterized as a sophisticated strategic move by the United States. Such an outcome could benefit Iran significantly. The United States might position itself as an ally of new Iranian leaders, which would be transformative for a country heavily impacted by American sanctions. Iraq and Saudi Arabia could also become direct allies, marking a major geopolitical shift in the Middle East that could theoretically expand U.S. influence throughout the region. This remains theoretical. What is certain is that a carrier strike group is approaching Iran, and Trump remains characteristically ambiguous about whether a strike is imminent or whether this is another negotiation tactic.